So to continue, got cut off there. And Cassius says to Brutus, that you know how much the people may be moved by that which he will utter. So basically, Cassius's main concern is that the people love Mark Antony, and the people may be moved or they may be influenced by what he says. So now, what is important to note here is that Brutus gives Mark Antony some stipulations. Okay, so if you look right here, which in your book, this is towards the middle of page 42, Brutus says, "By your pardon, I will myself into the pulpit first and show the reason of our Caesar's death. What Antony shall speak, I will protest he speaks by leave and by permission. All that we are contented Caesar shall have true rights and lawful ceremonies. It shall advantage us to do us wrong." So basically he's saying, by your pardon, I will go into the pulpit first. I will speak first. This is Brutus. And then he's saying, what Antony shall speak, what Antony says, I will say he speaks by our permission and by our sort of blessing, or they're kind of like endorsing what he says. Okay. Now, Cassius, you notice, says, "I know not what may fall. I like it not." So Cassius definitely voicing his concerns here about Mark Antony being allowed to speak to the crowd. But of course, since Brutus is basically in charge at this point, he continues. So Brutus says, and in your book, this is at the bottom of page 42, "Mark Antony here, take you Caesar's body. And now here are the stipulations," right? "You shall not in your funeral speech blame us," can't blame us, "but speak all good you can devise of Caesar." Okay, speak good things about Caesar and say you do it by our permission. We are allowing you to do this. And if you don't, he says, "else shall you not have any hand at all about his funeral, and you shall speak into the same pulpit whereto I am going after my speech is ended." So if you follow these directions, if you don't follow these directions, you can't speak. And you can speak as long as you go to the same pulpit, the same area where I'm going to speak after my speech is ended. So Brutus wants to speak to the crowd first. Let's think about why. Probably because he wants to influence them, right? He wants to make sure that the crowd understands his reasoning and why he did what he did, along with the other conspirators. So his logic is, I'm going to speak to the crowd first, kind of like set them up, and then, Mark Antony, you can speak to them. And basically only with our permission, and only say good things about Caesar. So Brutus is sort of allowing Mark Antony to do this, but again, there's some stipulations, okay? So if we look at the bottom of page 42, Mark Antony says, "I desire no more," and they prepare the body. So now, at the top of page 43, you notice that your stage directions say, "Exit all but Antony." So Antony is alone on stage talking to Caesar's body. Now, Caesar is dead, so he's alone. Hopefully you remember what that's called. Begins with an S. Soliloquy, okay? So now he is going to speak over Caesar's body. And I want you guys to pay really close attention, because this whole time that Mark Antony has been talking with Brutus and Cassius, notice he's been kind of like complimenting them, and he's been very careful with his words. But now that they all leave, Antony is going to tell us how he really feels. And he's going to do that through talking sort of over Caesar's body. So pay attention to the soliloquy. I'll pause it right after the soliloquy is over so we can talk about just that part. Here we go. He's crying, in case you can't hear that in the recording.
"Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers. Thou art the ruins of the noblest man that ever lived in the tide of times. Woe to the hand that shed this costly blood. Over thy wounds now do I prophesy, which like dumb mouths do ope their ruby lips to beg the voice and utterance of my tongue. A curse shall light upon the limbs of men. Domestic fury and fierce civil strife shall cumber all the parts of Italy. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, and dreadful objects so familiar, that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war. All pity choked with custom of fell deeds, and Caesar's spirit ranging for revenge, with Ate by his side come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry, havoc, and let slip the dogs of war, that this foul deed shall smell above the earth, with carrion men groaning for burial.
All right, so hopefully you could hear it there in Mark Antony's tone of voice, but he is A, crying, and B, pretty angry, which are not emotions that he really let Brutus and Cassius know. I mean, when he started talking to them, he said, you can kill me if you're going to kill me, but he didn't really let them know the depth of his pain. So let's look up a couple of lines. So first of all, he's talking to Caesar's body. And if you look here, he says, over thy wounds do I now prophesy. So to prophesy, it sounds like prophesize. It means to predict, okay? So he's looking at Caesar's body. He sees all the stab wounds. This is going to come up later, but Caesar was stabbed 33 times, okay? So all the senators, when they stabbed him, was like multiple times. And he now is going to talk over Caesar's wounds. And notice he makes a comparison here to the wounds being like dumb mouths with ruby lips, okay? So I know it's kind of a weird image, but picture like the stab wound being a mouth with ruby red lips. That's basically the image that he wants us to see. And here he decides to talk about the curse that he is going to basically put on the people. If you look here, okay, he says, a curse shall light upon the limbs of men. So he is now creating this curse, okay? And let's look at the words of the curse. He says domestic fury. So we know domestic means at home, right? Like if it was a domestic flight, it would be within the United States. So domestic fury. So fury here at Rome. And fierce civil strife, civil fighting, civil war shall cumber all the parts of Italy, will be everywhere. Blood and destruction shall be so in use, so there will be so much blood and destruction, and dreadful objects so familiar, dreadful objects, things like swords, okay, will be very familiar, that mothers shall but smile when they behold their infants quartered with the hands of war. So he's saying that people will be so used to war and blood and destruction that moms would smile when they held their babies cut up and killed by the hands of war. I mean, that's a pretty intense image he paints for us. And then he says, and Caesar's spirit raging for revenge with Ate by his side. If you look at the bottom, Ate is the goddess of Greek discord, meaning war or disagreements. By his side come hot from hell, shall in these confines with a monarch's voice cry, havoc and let slip the dogs of war. That line, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war, is very, very famous. And it's famous because this is Mark Antony's sort of promise, is that he is going to let slip these dogs of war. He is going to incite a civil war in Italy, in Rome. So here in his soliloquy, Mark Antony lets us know what his real feelings are. He does not love Brutus, and he's not cool with shaking the hands of all the conspirators. He actually is really sad and really pissed off, and he's ready to start a war over it. So this soliloquy right here, top of page 43, is really, really important. So hopefully you've taken some notes on that. All right, we're going to finish this scene, guys. Almost done. Enter Octavius's servant. All right, so we're about to meet well, sort of meet a new character. We're going to meet him kind of by proxy. So, what I mean by that is the character is not in this scene, but a servant of that character. So, who is Octavius? Well, Octavius is Caesar's adopted son. So, more or less like his heir to his throne, if you think of Caesar as being a king. So, when Octavius Caesar's servant is coming in, he's coming in to see Mark Antony because Mark Antony had written him a letter. Caesar wrote him a letter inviting him to come to Rome. So Octavius's servant is kind of like walking into this crazy situation, being like, hi, the guy I serve, he was invited to come here. What's going on? And so luckily, he encounters Mark Antony, and they're going to have a very brief conversation to finish out this scene where Mark Antony is basically going to give some warnings protecting Octavius Caesar because perhaps right now is not the best time for him to come to Rome. So listen to this next part and just think about, what Mark Antony says for Octavius Caesar to do.
You serve Octavius Caesar, do you not?
I do, Mark Antony.
Caesar did write for him to come to Rome.
He did receive his letters and is coming, and bid me say to you, by word of mouth,
Oh, Caesar. Thy heart is big. Get thee apart and weep. Passion, I see, is catching, for mine eyes, seeing those beads of sorrow stand in thine, began to water. Is thy master coming?
He lies tonight, within 7 leagues of Rome.
Post back with speed and tell him what hath chanced. Here is a mourning Rome, a dangerous Rome, no Rome of safety for Octavius yet. Hie hence and tell him so. Yet stay a while. Thou shalt not back till I have borne this course into the marketplace. There shall I try in my oration how the people take the cruel issue of these bloody men. According to the which thou shalt discourse to young Octavius of the state of things. Lend me your hand.
All right, guys. So here we see that Octavius Caesar's servant, when he walks in, he notices Caesar's body, right? So right here, and on your book, this would be at the bottom of page 43, when Octavius Caesar's servant says, "Oh, Caesar," that's where he notices Caesar's body and he starts to cry. So we see here that Antony says to him, thy heart is big, get thee apart and weep. So basically, he's acknowledging like, oh, that's so sweet that you feel bad about Caesar. Now, where is Octavius Caesar at this point? The servant tells us right here, and this is at the bottom of page 43, that Octavius Caesar is within 7 leagues of Rome. Just so you have an idea of the distance, that's about 21 miles away. So in an age where you don't have cars, it's a little far away, but he's pretty close. And so that's why Antony says to him, post back with speed and tell him what have chanced. Like, run back there and tell him what happened, because should Mark Antony come to Rome? No, right? He says, here is a mourning Rome, a dangerous Rome, no Rome of safety for Octavius yet. So Antony's concern is that if Octavius comes to Rome right now, he might not be safe. He was safe because he wasn't there, but if he comes back and the people are incensed and there's, people wanting to kill people associated with Caesar, that could be an issue. So he says basically that Octavius should stay away till I have borne this corpse into the marketplace. So till I have brought this body into the marketplace, there shall I try in my oration how the people take the cruel issue of these bloody men, according to which thou shalt discourse to young Octavius' state of things. So basically, tell him he can't come back until I've brought Caesar's corpse into the marketplace. And in my oration, in my talking, oration means talking, how I've explained to the people exactly what needs to happen. So that is the end of Act 3, Scene 1. As we can see, there's a kind of, not a conspiracy, but there's some new deception brewing. And now we see that the conspirators sort of think that everything's good, that they did their plan, everything's done, they're going to have Caesar's funeral, and that's it. Whereas Mark Antony, this is kind of the start of things for him. He's been on the sidelines this whole time, just doing what Caesar told him to do. And now he's taking up this mantle saying, I am going to start a war, be a civil war because of what these men did, and I'm not going to let them get away with it. So you guys will start to see that Mark Antony definitely has a huge part to play in Acts 3, 4, and 5. So that is where we will end things for our first video lesson. Scene 2 will be the funeral, and it's a big, most important part of the book, probably. So definitely be on board for that. Remember, if you have any questions, you guys know that I can't ever go through every single line of the play with you. But I tried to point out the most important things to you, as I always do. If you have any questions and you want me to go through things with you, remember that my live office hours are between 10 and 11 a.m. and 2 to 3 p.m. You can join those live office hours by simply going to Google Classroom and entering the meeting nickname that is posted there. It will only work during those designated times. If you need any help outside of those designated hours, just shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to try and get on with you to help you. I heard recently that Shmoop is now charging for its study guides. So I will be looking for a new study guide to recommend, but I don't want to recommend Shmoop just because I'm slightly angry about the fact that they are charging. They're taking advantage of what's going on with this coronavirus, and they're charging for services that have literally been free for the entire 13 years I've been teaching. So in the meantime, if you need any help, there's resources out there for you online, but use me as your resource. If you need me to sit down with you and reread a section and go through it with you, I'm happy to do it, guys. That's what I'm here for. But hopefully you get a good sense of what's happening in Act 3, Scene 1. This lesson is going to be posted Wednesday. I'll post it today, which is Tuesday, but it'll be the assignment, everything will be ready on Wednesday. And then you guys have until Monday to read the entire lesson and everything. So if you've reached the end of this video, you're almost done. All you got to do now is go back into Google Classroom, and there's some questions that you need to answer just to kind of do a reading check and make sure that you understood Act 3, Scene 1. And then I'll see you back here for our next video on Act 3, Scene 2. Have a good one.